communicate with someone who does not yet exist, and with whom in all probability you share no common language. Even as I write this letter, I am profoundly aware that it must contain two highly dubious assumptions. First, that you'll be able to read it and understand it. Secondly, that having read and understood it, you'll also be able to appreciate the severity, the grave importance of the message it contains. My world and your world are simply too distant from each other in time and culture. But I am also aware that I must try. I must try to warn you about the dangers that lie beneath your feet, that have lain there hidden for thousands of years. This letter, though, is not meant to frighten. It means to free you and keep you from harm's way. This is a message and part of a system of messages. Pay attention to it. Sending this message was important to us. We consider ourselves to be a powerful culture, but these are not places of honor. No highly esteemed deeds are commemorated here. Nothing valued is here. What is here was dangerous and repulsive to us. This message is a warning about danger. The danger is found in many particular locations and is still present in your time as it was in ours. The danger is to the body, and it can kill. This danger is an emanation of energy. It is unleashed only if you substantially disturb these places physically. These places are best shunned and left uninhabited. This is the story of one of these places. How can I begin to tell you that we wished you no harm, and did what we did only because we wanted what was best for you? That we were honest people who tried our best to do what was right and not burden you with our deepest and darkest of secrets. These are the challenges that I am faced with when trying to communicate with you. Do you know who we are? Do you know what we have done and why we did what we did? We reached a point we all knew was coming, but wanted to avoid. A point where we needed to start dealing with the results of our actions. No matter what we did, we knew sacrifices needed to be made. We weren't willing to give up our lifestyle, so some other price needed to be paid. Every action has an equal and opposite reaction, and we had to put the consequences of our actions somewhere. There was no perfect place, and we knew that this was a decision that was going to affect you far more than it would us. With so much at stake, there is no way that everyone could have been happy with the result. This is a message of hope. Hope in a time that often seemed hopeless. Hope in a people who didn't know what to hope for, and hope in places where we didn't expect to find it. This message has taken us to some of the deepest and darkest points in the world, and we have surfaced to bring you a story we hope will inspire you. Inspire you to stay away from what we have left behind, and to build something much brighter and more glorious than we could ever imagine. This is not a story for us, but rather a story for you to learn about us, so that you can move on, and we can rest in peace, knowing that we have burdened you no longer. Here is our story. Throughout the Cold War, we were fed many half-truths from both the anti-nuclear movement and the nuclear industry. Many of us had no idea what nuclear weapons or nuclear energy was, but we were led to believe that they were a great danger to us all. News flashes of Chernobyl and 3 Mile Island only increased this fear of this mysterious substance.
Our friend the atom, as one sort of children's storybook put it, was going to give us unlimited supplies of power, was going to end our reliance on oil, was going to have us colonizing the moon and living in a world without want of energy.
It's not surprising that nuclear energy is associated with hope. It comes out of an era, that post-Second World War era where we had tremendous optimism that science and technology was going to be able to be used to solve so many human problems, to elevate the human condition, make life easier for us.
Really, for most people, energy is something that's simply given, something that most of us don't think about. And it undermines our ability to make wise choices about the direction we should be taking on energy if we don't in fact know what the foundations are for energy use in our society.
The physicists are really live in fantasy land. Faith, hope and trust and a little sprinkling of pixie dust. Faith that we won't have a meltdown. Faith we won't release lots of isotopes as we repower the plant, but they always do. Faith that the public won't find out the evil that they're up to. Faith that there won't be a major accident. Faith that they will find the answer to the storage of radioactive waste for 1 million years, and they've been saying they can find it for 40 years.
Nuclear energy has an eerie component to it. It involves something that we can't see and that we can't really intuitively understand. The way that we understand, for example, coal, that we understand fire, that we understand gasoline. But we don't quite understand how nuclear energy works. It takes place on a level that sort of transcends the manual capacity of the mind, and it enters into a hidden world.
Nuclear energy has a long and complex history. It goes back actually to the 19th century when people first started to think about the power within the atom. And scientists at the time and the journalists made a great to-do about it, as if there were some kind of magical, mystical, supernatural force of nature, completely uncanny and different from anything that was known before. Now actually, of course, nuclear energy isn't any more uncanny than the forces, the chemical forces that we have when we strike a match.
Once upon a time, there was a kingdom where people had gotten used to using a lot of energy, and one day a fellow came along and offered them a goose. And this is the story of the goose that laid the toxic egg. Now, this goose was a marvelous goose. You just had to feed it a very small amount of stuff and it would produce feathers that you could use to produce energy, and there was the rumor of this incredible golden egg that would follow. But there was one problem with this goose. It only ate a little bit, but it shit a lot. And this shit was incredibly toxic. But people were so excited that this goose's feathers would provide energy and the promise of the golden egg that they didn't worry about the shit. They just said, we'll deal with that later. And long after the goose died, the shit was still around, dangerously causing cancer and birth defects and genetic damage to people's chromosomes and the rest of the environment. And so that to me is the parable of nuclear power.
And in so doing, it creates stuff that we associate, this is nuclear waste, with pestilence, with disease, rotting from within. And it's something that we will always have to live with in the lifetimes of generations that go on exponentially after us.
We were hearing about the challenge for my generation was going to be what we were going to do with all of our leisure time, because we were going to be working, 5-10 hours a week. And so because science and technology were going to just make our lives so abundant. Well, of course, I can tell you that's not the case, and I don't know of anyone who's working those kind of hours. So there was nuclear energy was associated with that kind of optimism. It was the new science. It was going to bring this brave new world, and it hasn't panned out that way.
early on began to fear the nuclear reactors would blow up like atomic bombs. Now they can't do that at all, but still the whole idea of a reactor is sort of a little atomic bomb, with all that goes along with atomic bombs, because atomic bombs mean not just blowing things up, they mean the end of the world, they mean radioactive monsters coming out of the desert, giant ants, all sorts of fearsome creatures. Now, of course, radioactivity won't actually make insects giant. If anything, it'll make them sick and small. But the idea that there was this tremendous power within nuclear energy was translated into the idea of giant insects, giant crabs, giant people. Everything was somehow more powerful if it had radioactivity in it.
And they fear it because they've been told to fear it. The media, over the course of the last 50 years, has focused on radiation. We've all grown up knowing people who believe that radiation causes mutations. Ninja Turtles, the Spider-Man, all of those movies and Hollywood creations, all were involved with radiation or exposure to radiation, when none of that could occur. But yet it was such an entertainment value that we have been told, and we all believe instinctively, that radiation causes these bad things.
We cannot allow fear to command our judgment any longer. The choices we made in the past will have real consequences for many generations to come. I now realize that our perception of nuclear waste was nothing more than a fictitious monster rooted in fear rather than fact. How can we reconcile these differences? Do we want to live in fear of the unknown?
We create artificial radioactivity all the time in an X-ray machine. The old-fashioned cathode ray tubes in a television set put out a lot of radiation in X-ray form. So we can create radioactive materials, and when we make them as a material itself, as a substance that is itself radioactive, it decays away over what is known as its half-life. Some radioactive substances have short half-lives, some have long half-lives. The radioactivity in the material behind me is from plutonium, which was used in nuclear weapons, and it has a half-life of 24,000 years. So 10 times the half-life, over 250,000 years, is how long this material will take to effectively decay away to lead. So in 250,000 years, I would be sitting next to a pile of lead.
Well, when we talk about nuclear waste, we really have to talk a lot about the perception that people have, not just of nuclear waste, but of radiation as a general. And there is a huge stigma and aura and almost hatred of nuclear things and fear of nuclear things.
So, first of all, any energy system at the scale at which humans now use energy has pretty profound risks. So, it is not meaningful to say there are some risks, unless you say something about how big they are in numbers that really matter, like number of people who die per kilowatt hour or what have you, or you compare them to risks of other technologies, it's meaningless. So for nuclear power, the big risks that people talk about are reactor risks, the risk that a reactor will catastrophically melt down, in some way release radioactivity, the risk of weapons proliferation, the link to nuclear weapons, risks associated with extracting the fuel and making the fuel cycle, and then risks on the back end of waste disposal. So that's the sort of range of risks, and for each of those you can compare them to the risks of other technologies, except maybe the weapons risk, which is really unlike any other.
Well, first of all, one of the myths is belied by the fact that I'm sitting here in front of stacks of highly radioactive waste. I am protected by the nature of the radiation itself. The radiation in those barrels would be harmful if I ingested it or I inhaled it, but I'm not going to put my head in the drums. I am going to stay outside of the range of that radiation and be safe.
Nuclear power in its operating mode that we have has been much safer than other ways we have of making electricity. And that is true even when one counts the big accidents that have happened, including Fukushima and Chernobyl. So if you look at the actual data of what the impacts have been to human health or to climate change, the risks are low.
If nuclear energy harnesses the power of nature and is based upon the laws and principles of physics, How could it possibly be a monster? We were a society of progress, with a religious focus on growth before everything else. We warned ourselves plenty of times that this growth would have a cost, but our need for progress was often far too great for us to heed these warnings. With a need for cheap and abundant energy, we learned how to split the atom and heralded a new and exciting age of growth and prosperity.
Because we have engineering methods and because we know a lot about geology, we can select systems, disposal systems that can effectively demonstrate, essentially guarantee that this material will not get out if left undisturbed.
What we have is nuclear power, which is expensive, very expensive to generate, and it also creates large amounts of waste. And this is one of the insoluble problems of nuclear power. So the record is mixed, and the experts have no consensus.
They say, trust us, we're good scientists, we'll find the cure. And that's like me saying to a patient, you've got pancreatic cancer, you'll probably die in about 6 months, but trust me, I'm a really good doctor, and in 20 years' time I'll find the cure.
Deciding what to do with this waste taught us that we could no longer buy into the illusion that we could hold nature's most powerful force in the palm of our hand. For your sake and the sake of your children, we needed to find a way to protect you from what we created.
Time takes away, won't forgive, never fades. But time can create changes night into day.
We'll use nuclear fuel, which is the material that NWMO's tasked to manage, is the waste product from a nuclear power station. After the fuel bundles are put into the reactor, they generate energy which causes heat, which turns a steam turbine, which produces electricity. But after about 18 months, those fuel bundles are no longer efficient source of energy for that process, and they're removed. When they are removed from the reactor, they have two properties that require us to really think hard and manage them very carefully. One is that they're very hot, but the other is that there's a radiation emitting from it. It's potentially hazardous to people in the environment if it's not managed carefully. And the nature of the hazard is that it's hazardous for hundreds of thousands of years. So the challenge for Canadians and for society is how to manage this used nuclear fuel in a way that contains and isolates it from people in the environment and is respectful of all the generations to come.
The Government of Canada struck the Nuclear Waste Management Organization, an organization that is controlled by appointees from those provinces that have nuclear power plants, Ontario, Quebec, New Brunswick. That organization is trying to find a technologically viable, commercially affordable solution to the disposal of waste. They have a huge problem ahead of them. Humanity has not been able in the past to solve a problem that involves storing something stably for 100,000 years or more, ensuring that it doesn't contaminate the wider environment. The jury is out as to whether or not they will be able to find a technique that is in fact going to protect humanity and the environment for hundreds of centuries.
Nuclear wastes really aren't that different from other wastes in society. I mean, the long-lived things, when they say, well, nuclear waste has to be looked after, put away forever, and it does. I mean, the high-level stuff does need to be dealt with for a long, long time, effectively forever. But that's the same with regular waste that society deals with. Arsenics, cyanides, mercury metals, cadmium, all those things last forever. And they also should be dealt with like this. I mean, the public could just as easily have had this fixation and fear of those materials, but they don't. We deal with those actually by burying them on surface landfills, which is incredible. And yet here, for materials of similar length and toxicity of time, although different kinds of toxicity through this radiation, the public is scared skinny, and it just doesn't make sense, because they're proposing to dispose of these long-lived waste deep underground, and yet things that are of similar impact, and of which are much larger volumes, much larger, thousands of times more volumes of these hazardous wastes in society, are dealt with just by putting them into surface landfills where they're exposed to erosion and other things.
The method that we are pursuing in Canada for the long-term management of used nuclear fuel includes two components, a technical component and the management system. From a technical point of view, the ultimate objective is to isolate and contain used nuclear fuel in a deep geological repository in a suitable geological formation. The fuel will be monitored, and it will remain retrievable for an extended period of time. It is important because it is an ethical issue, and it is a moral obligation. Used fuel right now is safely managed in surface facilities around the world, and all these facilities are licensed, and they have an excellent safety record. However, the fuel that is on the surface requires maintenance. The containers that are used are not long-lived containers. Their lifespan is maybe 50 to 100 years, so they will need active maintenance. And the hazard that is associated with used fuel is a long-term one. Radioactivity will be there for hundreds of thousands of years.
You put the material into the earth. The earth is essentially an imperfect container. It has cracks. Okay, material moves. The earth doesn't stand still. So I'd rather have some mechanical object that we can watch and we can replace, and I feel safer doing that than putting it in an imperfect container, which is the earth.
The way they're talking about disposing of nuclear waste deep underground, and it's not just going to be thrown down there in liquid form, they're going down there in solid form. They're going to be encapsulated in cement or in bentonite clays and things like that. It's a state of the art. Nothing else in society, no other toxic materials, hazardous materials are being dealt with at that high of a level. Everything else has been dealt with much more casually. And actually, if anything, the nuclear waste disposal programs are setting the way. They're setting the pattern for what should be done, how we should be dealing with all wastes. People are somehow very worried about it.
There's not going to be a Hollywood ending to this story. It's not going to be, and everybody lived happily ever after. The material is going to stay radioactive for long periods of time.
With so much public fear of nuclear waste and radioactivity, the question remained, who would take on the responsibility of welcoming this fire into their community, and why would they want it?
Desert land, where our milk and honey ran, rain again. Thunder, bring the lightning
in. Bruce County is a collection of small communities on the eastern coast of Lake Huron. It is one of the most fertile regions in North America and home to the world's largest nuclear power facility. Many of these communities' municipal governments have demonstrated an interest in storing high and low-level waste underground, close to the Great Lakes Basin.
When we stepped on this land, it was a bare field. I built all the buildings you see in the background and everything. That's here. When we stepped on this land, this bare field, the feeling that surged through my body is that this is where I want to die. That sounds somewhat morbid, but it isn't morbid. It's a life-affirming thing.
As a young man, in my late teens, I decided I was interested in being a farmer because It seemed to be an occupation that involved something that was real, working with nature, working in nature to try and produce food.
It's tough to make a living in this area. I've seen people who have come in and they love the scenery, the greenery and everything, but if you don't have a good job, usually based in agriculture, and that's our predominant economy in South Bruce, it's tough going.
For my entire adult life, young people have been moving away from Huron County. It hasn't changed, and I suspect for the generation preceding me, it's been the same.
This is one of the most beautiful places on this planet. It has been inhabited continuously but intermittently for at least the last 6,000 years. There's evidence that there were inhabitants here before the last ice age. It's just an incredibly sacred place. It's a wonderful place. You know, it's also the home of the world's largest nuclear complex. I don't know if you can hear it today. You hear the hum all the time. You hear its traffic noise. It just asserts itself.
Certainly with the global recession, I think that's what's fueled our council's desire to join the project, to bury the high-level waste. Everybody's concerned about jobs and the erosion of the manufacturing sector in different communities. Community to the north of us, Owen Sound, has been hit very hard. We've lost many factories. What do we do next? Where are we going? How are we going to have jobs to keep young people here? We don't want young people to migrate to the cities.
Farmers struggle sometimes, so it would be a boon to this area, no doubt. And if you see the literature that they give us regarding this, it's 90% economic boon to the community that accepts it. There's one or two lines at the bottom of exploring the impact.
I heard about it from our mayor. He had just returned from a conference in Ottawa based on the nuclear industry. And at that conference, MWNO had a booth. How the story evolved from there differs. I remember him telling me that they approached him and the other mayors in Bruce County and said, would you like to host this and receive the benefits of the compensation payments? And NWMO's position is that the mayors came up with the idea on their own at the conference.
There have been a series of secret meetings, 16 secret meetings since 2005 on the DGR. DGR 1 in Kincardine and the DGR 2 that's proposed for Saugeen Shores. And these secret meetings involved the mayors, a few councillors, and they went on for years. But the most disturbing fact is that during the last election in 2010, your local mayors, they knew about this plan for a DGR, but they deliberately chose to keep it secret. They deliberately chose not to run on that platform because they knew what would happen to their seats if they came out and said, this is my platform, I'm going to bury nuclear waste in your backyard. They knew they wouldn't get elected. They kept it secret, and that is shameful, and we must turf these mayors out of office.
I am actively engaged. I've given up virtually all other activity to be actively engaged. In the morning, I spend 3-4 hours every day going through the current listings on the registry, making notes, seeing what to do. We've taken out a home equity line of credit so that we can have funds to hire lawyers. It's not because I want my view to prevail. I don't think my view has anything to do with this. I think we need to think about alternatives. I mean, this is a huge deal. We're putting stuff there that's radioactive. Let's think. Let's think. And if it costs me my house and property, well, then it cost me my house and property. At least I've tried to allow us to think.
I was at the Royal Commission on Electric Power Planning in the 1970s because I was concerned about the desire to commit, Ontario Hydro to commit to a much larger nuclear program. And the experts who came in those days said things like, oh, you know, I just have a gut feeling we'll have this problem solved in 5 years. Don't worry about the nuclear waste.
If this project is going to affect all of our lives tremendously, I mean, consider how a minimum of 5 years construction will be going on. This construction goes on 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year, for a minimum of 5 years. Can you hear the hum of the reactors there? What about when they're piling the rock? The waste rock alone will be 10 hectares, 40 acres. It'll cover 15 meters high. Do you know, that's the size of our farm. Goes out to the road, up to the trees. 40 acres, 15 meters high, higher than any of the buildings on our place. Day and night, beep, 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 for 5 years. What do you think that will do to people in their enjoyment of property and life?
Well, there's no doubt that it has been incredibly divisive. There have been all kinds of fractures. I think that some people who agree with our council going forward in the process feel that our group should just go along with the process and not voice their opinions, or not voice them quite so, I guess they would probably say, aggressively.
Your presence here shows that we demand transparency and accountability at every level of our government. Your presence shows that we love our precious Great Lakes, and your presence here shows that we are not a willing community, and that we say, no nuke dump! No nuke dump!
No nuke dump! No nuke dump! No nuke dump! No nuke dump! No nuke dump! No nuke dump!
If ever there was a place that understood radioactivity, Northern Ontario would be it. For nearly 40 years, most of the world's uranium was mined out of the area, and communities like Elliott Lake, Hornpain, and Manitouwadge flourished with unprecedented growth. Now the mines are gone, and each community is looking for inventive ways of bringing people back.
For me personally, Manitouwadge is sort of an escape or a paradise. I lived in Toronto, and I was born and raised there, and I worked there for several years, and I lived in that rat race, and I decided that it wasn't for me, and I came up here to find something different, and what I found was happiness.
Elliott Lake was founded on uranium. It's the uranium mines. That's the only reason Elliott Lake exists. So we had a long experience as a one-industry town. We had a very prosperous town when the mines were here. They feel there's a bit of a social responsibility now to say, okay, we've benefited from this at a number of stages. Is it unrealistic for us to now be asked to do something to look at the long-term storage of the waste product, such as it is?
Over the last few years, Hornpain's been in a financial constraint. It's actually happened to all northern communities. We've lost a lot of industry, mainly forestry.
One of the biggest lessons of living in remote northern Ontario is that prosperity is not forever. When the global recession hit in 2009, Hornpain came close to turning into a ghost town. The owner of the town's main building declared bankruptcy, and shortly after that, the police station, library, post office, and hotel all closed their doors too.
And now communities are looking for a way to pick up the economy. And I guess some people see this as a way of creating jobs for the future. But honestly, I don't know, I don't agree with it, to be honest, because I see the risks involved. And like I said, 100,000 years is a long time to be monitoring something that's 2 kilometers underground.
Many of the communities who have agreed to be studied by the Nuclear Waste Management Organization are communities that are really in tough times. If you go through the list of the northern communities, most of them have lost a mine or a mill in recent times. So a lot of the municipalities have said, well, we'll take a look, because they feel that it would be irresponsible of them to not take a look, because it is an economic development project. That's how it's packaged.
The prospect of 1,000 jobs, the prospect of $16 to $24 billion of economic activity, especially in a smaller community, that's really significant. And given the long-term nature of these jobs, we've lived the ups and downs of mining, of forestry, of different industries. So to look at something where some people would say, oh my God, this stuff is going to be around forever, that's terrible. We say, this stuff's going to be around forever, that's great. Because we're very comfortable that being around forever means economic activity around it forever.
The first thing is that we want to learn more about it. That's what the program is. It's a learn more program, and it's a program that there will be no decision made as to which community gets it for at least 10 to 15 years. What we need to know is we need to make sure that we understand both what we would like about it and what we would object about it. I don't want to see this community or any other community say, we don't want it no matter what. You know, and you have to know what it's all about.
I think it's a worthwhile project. It's something that that community should look into. It's something that somebody has to do. Let's put it that way. We've got a problem, someone has to address it. And if the opportunity's there, take the opportunity to learn what's going on about it, make your decision and go from there.
Well, the transportation of nuclear waste material going to one particular depot in a country will invoke thousands and thousands and thousands of transportations in trucks of high-level radioactive waste, and it's been dubbed mobile Chernobyl. Because if one of those trucks crashes, which inevitably it will, or turns over or slips on black ice or whatever, and the cast breaks open, you'd have to evacuate Chicago.
The repository, by its very nature, is in a fixed location. You have to bring that material to that repository, and the waste transport goes through people's backyards. People who don't enjoy the benefits, people who don't have the economic benefits associated with the reactor or the installation that created the waste. They are innocent bystanders, but yet the waste is going past them. And they are needlessly, in some people's minds, subjected to exposure.
I don't think it's ethical or reasonable to suggest that one community could make a decision that is going to impact a larger area, a larger region.
Transporting radioactive materials can be done safely, is done safely, it has been done safely since the beginning of the atomic age. In fact, I challenge anyone to point to an accident, a transportation accident involving radiation, where people were physically harmed due to the exposure to radiation. I don't believe that there has been any event ever in the 50 or more years of transporting nuclear materials across the country.
One can't help but wonder what impacts a multi-billion-dollar project would have in a small community like Hornpain or Manitowodge. Would a project of this scale change the community into something it never wanted to be? Can a community ever fully prepare for the changes that must surely take place?
You know, there have been times in the past where people can ask the question, should Manitowodge still exist as a community? The mines are gone. You know, what's supporting it mostly is social tax dollars on schools and OPP and hospitals, you know, with only one big employer. Should it even exist? If you were to have a nuclear depository, I think they would answer that question pretty clearly, is that yes, it will exist and it's going to grow and it's going to be bigger, because you're going to need the infrastructure and the facilities to support it, to house the people that are going to work there and to support them. So it's a sense bringing another mine to the community, another employer, but instead of maybe 50 years of employment, that's going to leave it behind. It may be an employer that never leaves it behind and is almost recession proof.
If this project came to Hornpain, you know, obviously Hornpain would change drastically. You know, you're not going to put a world-class facility into a town where the streets are slowly deteriorating, where the parks aren't evident as they should be, where the recreational facilities aren't quite what they should be for a community. So taking all of that, I mean, I can see a lot of the community members were already talking about that. You know, if this comes about, what's it going to mean to us?
They could spend 10 years in this process, and at the end of the day, not be chosen. The repository might not be ever approved or licensed. It might not be chosen because their community rejects it. if the NWMO really requires that demonstration of willingness, I really would be surprised if any community will get that.
A lot of people have said they would find another place to live. They would move as far away as possible. That would be my opinion as well. I would be looking for a transfer out. I just don't see it as being safe. Like, it could be safe for the next 20 years or so, but leaving this problem for our children to deal with, I just don't think that's ethical whatsoever.
Not only would it affect us if we got it, but we should know how to argue if we're against it. We should know how to argue if somebody else in the region gets it. If you're arguing from ignorance, that's not very effective.
Now that you have heard our message, I trust that we have left you with enough information for you to know that this was never an easy decision for us to make. I hope that you are also not too quick to judge us for our decisions, and understand that you are always on our mind. I hope we will not let you down.
The communities who are in the NWMO process so far, I think, are in the process because they have been told there is money there. That's what that's what attracted them.
That's the upside, is the compensation payments, but what's the downside? Well, fewer people move to this community. Well, people, when they retire, will they choose to stay here? Will people want to raise children here in this community if it has that image of being the world's largest nuclear waste dump?
At the end of the day, it doesn't matter what the reasons are. What we require is a compelling demonstration of interest from the citizens that are going to be affected by this project, not by the mayor or council. And the compelling demonstrations mean is a majority of citizens are in favor of this project. And again, I cannot see how a community in its majority will accept a project at the detriment of safety.
I would say that, you want to be interested because you certainly want to know more. That nuclear waste is going to be buried, and it's going to be buried somewhere in Ontario, and we can't escape that. And it's going to probably be in Northern Ontario, and a Northern Ontario community who sticks their head in the sand and ignores the issues probably isn't doing themselves any favors, and you probably want to get involved in the process and know a lot about it. People make decisions about nuclear power every day. People in Toronto and the Southern Ontario, they live around a nuclear reactor, and they don't think twice about living in the area with one, but they think twice about the waste.
One reason that there's been a lot of opposition to waste, I believe, is not because some of the big environmental groups are actually that worried about the risk of waste. It's because they have other reasons to oppose nuclear power, perhaps completely legitimate reasons. And in the political reality, especially in American politics, blocking a pathway on waste was a way to kind of stick a spoke in the wheel and block the larger expansion of nuclear power. So it was more of a tactic than a real outcome. So it's made people talk a lot about waste, and yet I think objectively it's hard to argue that waste is one of the big things wrong with nuclear power.
The thing is, if our community is stupid enough to bury this stuff beside Lake Huron, it has the potential of leaking back out. I'm a farmer, I'm not a nuclear expert, but I water livestock. And I've stopped putting my water lines underground because when they leak, it's much harder to deal with them than when the lines are above ground. If we start burying waste, there's going to be an even bigger temptation to say, oh, well, it's out of sight, it's out of mind, and it's going to get abandoned in very irresponsible ways. Given how irresponsible they were at the start of the project of nuclear power in terms of kicking the waste problem into the future, I don't see them being any more responsible in terms of burying the waste now. And I think it's just another way of pretending that this isn't a problem and we've got this solved. I don't think so. They certainly haven't solved it in terms of the experience in Europe. And when you start having radioactive wastes leaking at the edge of the Great Lakes and leaking in the breadbasket of southwestern Ontario, you have done an incredibly stupid thing.
The greatest legacy that a deep geological repository could leave is no legacy at all. We pray that this tomb will last long enough to see this fire fade away.
The electric power infrastructure changes extraordinarily slowly. The average age of most of the infrastructure that keeps the lights on, of the power plants and the transmission systems, is older than most citizens. It's a very slow-moving system. We need to change it. The current electric system is filling our atmosphere with carbon dioxide in a way that will change the planet utterly over the next 100, 200 years. We need to change it because it's killing a lot of people and making people sick through air pollution. We need to change it because of the footprint it has on the land. But those changes get made incrementally, piece by piece. People often think about technological change in systems that they can see. So we're all used to the change of cell phones or changing cars or consumer equipment, which changes very quickly. You just buy a new one. Electric power isn't like that. It's this huge background infrastructure, by some measures, the biggest single piece of the industrial economy.
I regret and really feel a bit of guilt about the legacy we're leaving for your generation and my grandchildren and their children. We make a lot of mistakes, and we have made some very serious mistakes by not coming to grips with the storage issues related to nuclear power, for example, 50 or 60 years ago. We should have been working on that.
I cannot, as a matter of an expert, say what the right answer is. That I have no better opinion than any member of the public, because that's not just a matter of fact, it's a matter of values and judgments in a way that I can't claim to be better off than any other person you're going to pull off the street in Canada. We all get one vote. So I don't suppose that I know some magic answer about what's the right thing to do. My job is to try and tell people in as unbiased a way as I can what the trade-offs are and what the real risks are.
In general, I think everyone in Ontario who enjoys power, every single one of them should remember that what they're leaving to their children and to their children's children, whether they live in Toronto or they live in Northern Ontario, is something we all share in, and we all owe this debt.
You know what, we benefited from the mining, we benefited from the processing, we benefited from the electricity that's been produced. There's a strong feeling that we have an obligation now to close that loop. And in that sense, yeah, it's our decision, it's our generation's decision to make as to how we deal with it.
After all of this, I find myself returning to my initial question. How can I communicate with you in view of the fact that you do not yet exist and share no common language with me? How can we ensure that these places remain untouched, or that we've at least given you an appropriate warning to never explore them?
When you talk about building a facility that if in 1,000 years there's an ice age that lasts 1,000 years, and after that people come back to the area who have no knowledge of what's going on, how do you ensure their safety? The language may be different. We certainly know over the hundreds of years the changes in the English language, words that we don't use anymore, structures we don't use anymore.
Less than 100,000 years ago, there was probably a mile-thick sheet of ice on this place. We have no idea what it's going to look like, but it sure ain't going to look like what it is now, and there aren't going to be a whole bunch of Ontario Power bureaucrats running around looking after what they've stuck in the ground.
I always use the example of the pyramids. Europeans stumbled upon the pyramids 5,000 to 6,000 years later and said, they built a really sturdy structure, there must be something really good in there. And we went in and we found stuff that we considered to be really good. Do we have to be aware that in 2,000 years from now, someone may stumble upon the structure and say, they did a really good job of protecting this, there must be something really worthwhile.
So how do you send a message to the future? You're not communicating. Communication is two-way. So just like the waste and the geology, the sign has to be able to be there 100,000 years or whatever into the future. The second thing, that the sign has to be found. You can't hide it. You can't put it in. You can't put your warning sign or your don't dig sign here. You can't put it in a place where it's going to be difficult to find. You want it to be found. Signs are for honest people. Third, the sign has to be read and understood. It doesn't make any difference if you have a warning sign that somebody doesn't understand.
Ultimate responsibility for maintaining and managing these repositories goes on for times that we can't even conceive. It's okay for us to talk about our grandparents and our great-grandparents. We have an understanding of what those timelines sort of mean, but To talk in terms of 50,000 years or 100,000 years or 250,000 years is incomprehensible. And we don't understand the responsibility that's being created by the requirement to manage this waste for those kinds of time periods.
I don't regret that the industry is there. I don't regret that the industry has pushed me into this advocacy or this amount. You know, I think it's probably good for me. It makes me think, it makes me consider alternate points of view, it makes me think, you know, I mean, I'm so diametrically opposed to so much of the logic that goes into this, it makes me think about those bases. You know, that's not bad for me.
We are extraordinarily smart. We are extraordinarily tenacious. We have the ability to do amazing things. And although I have concern about where we may go, I don't have any lack of hope that the human spirit can rise to the occasion and actually do extraordinary things to make life better, to deal with the problems that unfortunately often we've created.
How can I be sure that this message will be believed, that its warnings will be heeded, and that this place remains untouched and unexplored? You will inevitably make your own assessment of the facts and choose what course of action makes the greatest sense to you. Well, I've told you what this place is, why it was built, and what you will find if you dig here. The rest is up to you.
It's possible to get overwhelmed by the magnitude of the problem, but we can separate that into our lives. We can separate it into what is the next right thing for me to do. And what's the next right thing for me might not be the next right thing for someone else. For the corporate executive, it's very different than from a humble theologian, you know, or for the homemaker, or for the 12-year-old kid. We each have the opportunities to make the next right step. And in doing that, you have these little, where you go, okay, that was the right thing to do. And I know this is a big problem, but I'm at least doing my part.
We need to have humility. We need to approach this with the greatest of fear, seeking guidance of what to do. I don't know what to do. I'm sure glad I didn't make it. I'm ashamed to have been part of the process that helped to create it. But, you know, we have it.